And welcome to PE turned RE. Today I am interviewing Jackson Dar. He's an investor in Memphis. He's got some property down there, and today we're to hear about his story. So thank you for being on today, Jackson.
Happy to be here, Curtis.
So can you kind of just update the people about who you are and what you currently have?
So right now, I've got two single family homes. I house hack one, and the other is just a straight rental. Um, I still do actively look for property. I went out and saw one on Tuesday, but so I'm still a small guy. But this is actually my third house hack that I'm on.
Oh, third house hack. Okay. So you did the two
Third
in
house hack, yeah,
Memphis. And then where was the first one?
yeah. The first one was also in Memphis, but so I'll give the quick explanation. So this is back in 2019. I didn't even know what house hacking was. I knew I might want to buy my own house, get into rentals or something like that. But I was in kind of a strange situation. At the time, there was a neighborhood in Memphis that I had identified that I knew, the market was on its way up because it was 2019. But I knew that this neighborhood not only was appreciating faster than the area in general, but was going to keep doing that for at least a couple of years. And it was a very affordable neighborhood. I mean, most at the time, most houses there were under $100,000 in good condition. So, but I had a strange problem. I had a good down payment. I had enough for 20% and some little fix ups here, new roof, things like that. And I had decent credit score, but my income was all over the place. I was a 1099 contractor, working actually as a political campaign manager, which would mean that during the even numbered years, I was making a good bit of money. And every time it was going up, it was, nothing crazy, started off low, but it was doing very well by that time. But then I would hit an off year and there just weren't as many contracts. There'd be a mayor's race here or something like that. But, you know, they need you in the when in the even years when everything's crazy, and then in the off years they don't need you as much. So sometimes I'd get an off year contract, but rarely would I. But I'd made good money in the previous year. But I would run into this problem where you know I still need to cover living expenses and things like that. So I'd save for it, and that'd be okay. But I thought, man, can't I get rid of this housing expense? It was very low housing expense, but can I get rid of this? Can I even make some money on it? I realized at the same time that I had two friends. One I already lived with, splitting an apartment, and another one that needed a place to stay and made good money. And, you know, they needed to move. The apartment complex I was in was terrible. It was starting to fall apart. And I said, well, look, how about I charge y'all each, 500 a room? Okay. And they said, yeah, sure. If you can get the house, that's great. Well, my mortgage was with taxes and insurance, my escrow payment was less than $600 a month. So I said,
Wow.
well, this works out really well for me. I'll split utilities too. It'll give me at least a little bit of extra income and get rid of that expense. I didn't even know, I'd never even heard the term house hacking, but this just occurred to me. And I was like, well, this makes pretty good sense. Let's try to go and get the house. And I got it. This was before lending tightened up some as well. I had to do an arm, I had to get a cosigner, but all the money was mine, and I found the tenants and all of that. And then as I sort of worked through that in the first couple of years, I started learning more about how to do house hacking, what are the advantages. Some of it was from reading different things online. So it was listening to Michael Zuber and One Rental at a Time. Some of it was just things I learned along the way, just by experience, trial and error. And in 2021, my job had changed at that point. I got a regular W-2 job, but I'm legally blind and I don't drive. So it was a lot further from work. Previously I would just go to wherever the race was, run the race and come back. So in between, I didn't really go a lot of places, didn't have a lot of transportation expense. But suddenly I've got this W-2 job. It's on the other side of town. It's not that bad, but when you Uber back and forth at $18 each way, 5 days a week, it's a problem. Plus, I
Mhm.
wanted to lock my rate because remember I was on a 5-1 arm and I was only had I had 3 years left, and I knew rates were going to go up because I'd been listening to Zuber. So I sold that property because I had been right. It had gone up a lot. So I bought it in 2019, April of 2019. I bought it for, with the 6,000 I had to put in it. Most of that was a new roof. There was some flooring. 79 in. 2 years later, a little over 2 years later, I sold it for 115. probably could have gotten 125, but needed to get I needed to get moved. And at the time, the area that I was buying in was near the university here in Memphis, and everything was going for cash the same day kind of deal. The University of Memphis had just gotten R1 status, so even though the market was starting to slow down a little bit, the rates hadn't gone up yet, and investors were still, you know, coming at that area like piranhas. So I took, a little bit lower than I could have got, but big profit. I needed to unlock that equity, and I did. I got that house near the university. I still have that one. That's my rental, and I had switched tenants. After a while, a couple people had gotten their own place. One guy had moved out of town, and I had gotten new tenants, or one new tenant, and briefly another one who also had to leave town eventually. Well, I took that tenant with me, and then there was another friend of mine who also worked at the same employer, and I put both of them in the new house with me. It was a little more, so I was still actually making money on it every month, not as much as I had been, but certainly some. And then after a little while, that guy I brought with me, he moved back to New York. The other guy that worked at the same employer as I did, he still is actually in that house and he rents it from me.
Mhm.
I think he just got a subletter too. But anyway, after about 2 years there, I was looking at other properties because remember, I still had some money left over from the sale of the first house, and I've been able to add a little bit to that. And I found a smaller, a little bit smaller house, but in, well, fewer bedrooms, a little bit bigger actually, but in a nicer area of town. The one near the university had been sort of right on a gentrification line, and when the interest rates went up, gentrification just halted. It was like a freight train stopping. And so it had appreciated a little bit, but not enough to where it made sense to sell it. And my buddy wanted to rent it. So I worked out a special financing deal on this house because it was that I'm coming to you from now, because it was needed some real work, but that means less competition for it. And I managed to get it, fix it up, and then I rented out the other bedroom to someone else I found. She's been great. She's coming up on a year, and you're here with me, and that's where I am now.
Nice. Wow. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
So
three
first,
houses in 6 years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So first though is when I had messaged you, you had told me that you were legally blind. So how one, I guess like how blind and how does that affect when you go to buy these places?
So that's actually a great question. So I'm not that blind. I say legally, and that is true. The line for legal blindness is about 2,200 uncorrected, and I'm right on the line. Maybe 205 or something, but it's probably gotten a little bit worse since the last time I got it checked. But I'm right on there, so I can see. And a lot of people, when they first meet me, they don't even realize. But the line for driving is 2050 corrected, and the best I ever corrected to was 2070. I don't even wear the glasses anymore because they don't help that much. Driving's the main thing, and I can zoom in with my phone for overhead menus or something. So I definitely can see most things, navigate the world pretty well.
Okay.
But when I go and look at a house, this is one reason why I people have told me, oh, you should go get your agent's license. You don't need to pay an agent, or usually you get paid out of the seller. They get paid out of the seller's end, but as it takes the price up. And I say, no, I have a trusted agent. I don't know about y'all, but I have a trusted agent that will often see things that I miss. I'll give you an example. A little bit south of here, there was a house we went to look at one time, actually for a friend of mine, because they had some money and they were thinking of getting a house here. And we walk in, and it looks great. It's in an old area of town. Like this house is from 1910, that house is from the 20s. Um, we get into the backyard, and my agent Jeff goes, "Oh, that's bad." And I go, "What do you mean that's bad? It looks like need to have the yard redone. It needs some landscaping work." And he goes, "Oh, no, 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 no." He points at the ground. I'm like, "Dude, I don't see what that is." And he goes, "That's the power line. It's not even connected to the house. It should be up. It should be up here." And I'm like, "Oh crap!" And that's the example I always use. But there's a lot of those. Jeff knows me. I trust him. He'll drive me around when we're looking at these things. And
Hmm.
it's worth it to me because there are things that I just won't see without having somebody there who knows what they're looking at and has my best interest at heart and all of that. There's a big trust factor there.
Oh yeah, that saved you from a big like headache right there. I mean, because you think it's all wonderful and nice, and you miss that key, very key thing. Nice.
Yes, and there's
So,
been several instances of that have killed deals. So
so as far as the management goes, then do you use Jeff as your property like, manager too, or do you manage them your own?
right now I self manage.
Okay.
So I'm in Tennessee, and in Tennessee, I don't know if this is true elsewhere, but in Tennessee, if you want to manage someone, you can self manage your properties all that you want. But if you
Mhm.
want to manage someone else's properties, you need a broker license. He just has an agent license.
Oh,
And
okay.
so he couldn't manage them if he wanted to. Now he's been thinking about getting his broker license, but there has to be a broker license in the property management office. So he doesn't do that at least yet. I
Mhm.
I feel like I will need some management at some point, or maybe I'll get a broker license, become a manager myself. I don't know, but right now, with a few units, I can still self manage, and I'm going to keep doing that as long as I can. There will come a point if I'm successful enough to get more properties that I won't be able to do that. But for now, I do self manage.
Okay. And then another question I thought of while you're talking about your story. Why Memphis? Because at least from an outsider's view, right? I'm up in Washington. When I hear
Tacoma, right?
Memphis, yeah. So when I think of like Memphis, I'm like, oh gosh, there's gangs, there's shooting, it's a rough area. So why did you choose to invest there?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I'll go over the other reasons in a second, but the main and biggest one is this is where I'm from. I did live elsewhere for a short time, a couple of years. Whenever I would leave to do a campaign, I would live somewhere for 3 or 6 months. I spent 18 months living in Washington, D.C., and I went to school in Virginia, a little not in the D.C. area, a little further south than that. I went to William and Mary, but um, a lot of it's where I was, and it's also, and this is to get into the other bits, a place that I know and understand.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear Memphis, you think, oh my God, oh, the shootings, the gangs, the car break-ins, and there's some of that everywhere, but it's definitely one of the higher, you know, higher rate cities for that kind of thing, right? But
Hmm.
if you know and understand the area really well, that I know this is going to sound crazy, it's actually a bonus. And here's why:
Oh.
it keeps prices down. So people here in Memphis, they think, oh my God, all this terrible crime. And you go, yes, it is here. But if you know the different neighborhoods, you know, you can buy things at cheaper prices. And if you select well, first of all, a lot of the people here are relatively used to it. That helps, right? And
Hmm.
those your tenants are going to be from here. But it keeps a whole lot of other people off of the market. So I was just talking about you, that house I bought it was in a neighborhood called Berkeley in 2019. Remember, I said I was all in for 79, and if I'd wanted a really, really revamped house, I could have got it for 100 or a little bit less, right?
Hmm.
Well, that was a pretty safe neighborhood. This sort of a white working class kind of Hispanic neighborhood. Okay, everybody, but mostly those two. And yeah, sure, the cartel's probably down the street, but the cartel doesn't really want to mess with you, right? Um, I know it sounds crazy, but there's safety, there's actual safety, and then there's perceived safety. And perceived safety is what most people operate on. So if you ask someone, is this area a good area or not? How much crime is in the area? They'll tell you their perception usually. Very rarely will they have gone through the numbers, checked it out. Well, this area at the time was actually getting safer. Um, a lot of people were being priced out of safer, wealthier parts of town and were trickling into this area, which is why it was going up so much. You had a ton of first time home buyers, you had a ton of investors too. But I mean, you know, half the houses on the street were owner occupied. That actually went up while I was there. A couple rentals got turned into first time home buyers, including mine, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's that knowledge. So I can sit here and say, okay, this house that I sit in right now, this is in an area called Midtown. The actual neighborhood's called Lenox, but that's a sub area. And this is a pretty dang safe part of town. Every once in a while, somebody's car still gets broken into. Don't want to pretend like that kind of thing doesn't happen. Every once in a while, there's a mugging, although I haven't seen any or heard of any in this part of town in a while. Um, and this would take a longer thing, so I won't go into it. But because of how Memphis is set up, it's kind of like a string, okay, of good areas sandwiched by bad areas. And then if you go a little bit further, it's more mixed. But because of that, you're never particularly far from the crime, but also, it's generally not happening in your neighborhood, even if the crime's a mile away.
Mhm.
And I told you that that price of that house, and of course that was 6 years ago before the COVID and all of that. But I mean, so I got a 2 bed, 2 bath house in a nice neighborhood. You know, what do you think the comps are for it right now? I got it for a lot less because it needs some work. What do you think the comps are for it?
All right, so you said you bought it for what price again?
Well, I bought it for like 162, but then I put like 60 into it.
162, 60 into it. So what is it? Probably worth like 270 now?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay.
But this is in my point is that this is in a pretty nice, safe neighborhood,
Hmm.
right? I don't know in one of the bad neighborhoods of Tacoma, what's the cost of a typical house?
Yeah, so when thinking of Tacoma, you think of like East Side of Tacoma, right? Gangs. That's where the natives are. Bad police over there. But it's still probably around 400 to 500, just depending on, the layout of the house.
Right. Yeah, and you get different bed and bath counts, and that really
Yeah,
matters.
yeah.
In in the worst parts, let's see, in the worst parts of Memphis, the real true, just devil take the
Mhm.
hindmost kind of places, right? Um, you know, the cost might be a quarter of that.
Oh, wow.
And, you get a little bit better, it gets a little bit better, a little bit
Mhm.
bigger, it gets a little bit more. You get the idea. The house I just went to look at on Tuesday, and it's a great deal. It's a bank owned property. It needs about 25K of work, but it was never a rental. It was, it had like two owners over its entire course of its life. Um, as I said, it's bank owned. You know, they want 100. It's 3 bed, 2.5 bath, 1,800 square feet. It's got a one-car garage, which is unusual around here. A lot of houses don't have garages, and most of the ones that do have a two-car. But they wanted 100,000, and I could probably get it for way less than that. A fully
Mhm.
fixed up house, and that's in the southwestern part of the city, almost in Mississippi. Um, a fully fixed up house in that area of that same size, might go for 140, 150, and with everything perfect.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
So easier barrier of entry from what it sounds
yeah,
like.
and the rents. So what would you say would be the market rent? So the house, let's say you get the house for 140. Okay, it's in great shape. It's in that area of town. It's got 3 beds, 2 baths,
Hmm.
just under 2,000 square feet. What do you think the rent is on that?
In Memphis,
Yeah,
ooh, I have no
in
idea.
that part of town too.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's probably less than here, so maybe like 1,500,
Probably tops out at 1,200.
12. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I had someone willing to do, and I was going to get it for a cheap price, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
I had someone willing to do 1,100. That was her current rent down the street. I already had a tenant picked out, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty common. In the worst areas of town, the lowest rent you're probably going to get is around like 750 for like for like one side of a duplex, and that's probably not in very good shape. The point I'm trying to get to here is that not only are the prices low, but the rents are a lot closer to that 1% line than
Mm-hmm.
you're used to in most places because people still have to have a place to live. There is a strong base of blue collar employment. Now, the white collar base of employment is pretty bad. I mean, it's there. We've got a couple of big companies, AutoZone, FedEx. I actually work on the
Mm-hmm.
operations side, the blue collar side for FedEx. But
Okay.
um, it's the rents actually support the prices around here for the most part.
Oh, wow. Okay. So then my question would be, so as you're in these communities, all right, we're both in the ORAT, the one rent at a time community. I'm sure that you listen to podcasts. A lot of what they say is to start with like multifamily, right? Go duplex, try or quad, but you've gone all single family, but rent by the room, it's from what it sounds like.
Yes.
Why have you gone that path instead of what we hear on a lot of podcasts?
So, and part of that answer has to do with the geography I was just talking about. So, um, I want to get into small multifamily, but the reasons I haven't done it, so the reason I didn't do it the first time was because I had a certain amount of money and I knew this neighborhood was going to appreciate more and all this kind of stuff. At least I
Mhm.
thought so, and I was right. Thank God. Um, but that area of town was built in the 40s through the 60s. Okay. And it was built mostly as post World War II GI Bill housing, almost all single family. There are almost no duplexes in that part of town. So, or triplexes or what have you. Now, if you go a little bit further west, there are a few, but you're also going into a not as good area, right? So we do have duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes in good parts of town, but because most of those were built pre-World War II, they're going to be in older parts of town. And while there are good older parts of town, I live in one right now. I'm talking to you from one right now. Most of those parts of town that do have those small multifamily aren't as good, or actually are usually pretty bad. And then the nicer areas that have them, like where I live right now, they have them, but I wouldn't say you wouldn't consider it more premium, but they're more premium. There's very little sort of in between neighborhoods that also have small multifamily. Most of the sort of okay, it's not super dangerous, but also it's affordable enough neighborhoods don't have that kind of housing stock.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So over where I am, it's kind of like intermixed, right? There's kind of pockets of things. My first duplex, there's all kind of single family like by it. This one, it's kind of a mix. But it's very interesting what
Yeah.
you're saying there is
and
that kind of
and
split.
there are exceptions. There are
Oh, of
exceptions,
course.
but
Yeah.
the thing is because those are exceptions, and because there aren't that many, uh, that are both affordable to buy, pretty affordable to buy, and in fairly safe areas. Because there aren't very many of them, investors hang on to them forever. I mean, I've seen a few hit the market, but when they do hit the market, they're often at a lot higher prices, or they go pretty quickly. Higher for here, higher for the neighborhood.
Hmm.
The university area has some of these, and those just I can't snap, but they just go like nothing. Even in this day and age, simply because you know simply because of where they exist and their relatively affordable price point.
Okay.
So I want to get into some of that. And don't get me wrong, the way the market's going, there should be some, even in this nicer area of town here, where I can probably I can probably get one. I even found the quadplex that was perfect. I just didn't have the money and financing lined up, and it got snapped up. But a lot of people want to ask crazy amounts for the small multifamily that does exist in nice areas,
Hmm.
and they'll just sit there and sit there and sit there.
Mm, I see. And so it sounds like you've done some value add on most of the projects that you've had, right? The projects ranging from 25,000, the highest I heard you say was like 60,000. What gave you the confidence to do these bigger projects?
Well, it's been different. So the first one I did do a little bit of value add, and that was because the bank made me. Um, as most banks sell their loans, right? They make you this loan, and then they sell it to Bank of America or U.S. Bank or something like that. Well, my first house that I got, they actually held the loan on their books, because it was a 5/1 arm, and they're not allowed to sell those anymore. But in order for them to give me the loan, they said, "Look, you've got to put a new roof on now, and you've got to change out some of this flooring now." It was a failed flip. Someone had gotten partway through flipping it, and they'd run out of money, or you know how it goes.
Oh yeah.
Okay, people get into something, they get over their heads, and then either the person that was fixing it up or someone's idiot cousin, because it's always somebody's idiot cousin, uh, destroyed some of the parquet flooring. It's a 1965 house. When they were trying to do some plumbing work, right? And so the bank said, "Look, you got to fix that. You got to fix that flooring." And it wasn't all of it, but it was a decent amount in the hallway. It led to the bedroom. So like, look, you have to fix that flooring and you put on the roof, and then if you do it within 90 days, if you promise to do that within 90 days of buying this house, you're cool. So the second one that I bought, I actually didn't do any work on. It was a flip, but it was a flip that had been completed, but they made some mistakes. I know this sounds terrible. One of my favorite things is to make money off of other people's stupidity. And by that, I don't mean scamming people. I mean finding people who have already made a stupid decision and helping them out of it, but they're not going to get what they want, right? So what had happened was it's on a main street called Highland. And I'll say the identifying information from here, so somebody will be able to find this, but there's a corner where the street turns into another street. It turns right. You can keep going, but it's not a major road anymore. And it turns right onto another street for like a block, and then it turns again, and it becomes a different major street. And somebody in the 40s, during World War II, I think it was built in 42 or 43, near what had been the military hospital here at the time, decides that it would be a good idea. They've got this little triangle corner lot on a hill on what would later become a busy corner. And they're like, you know what? We can stick 1,000 square foot World War II postage stamp on this thing. Oh, and by the way, to get up in the driveway, it's like this angle, okay?
Oh man.
There's a driveway, but and so somebody from Texas had come in and bought this thing because again, the area was kind of gentrifying and they were getting a couple blocks ahead of it. And they'd come in and they said, well, someone at some point had finished the attic and turned it from a 2-1 into a 3-2. Smallest 3-2 you've ever seen, but they did. And they said, okay, we're going to flip this thing and we're going to, put on the market as a 3-2 at this price and somebody's going to snap it up. And they started it out at, I think, 170. And by the time I got to it, it was all the way down to, I think, 140.
Mm.
I got it down to 120, where it actually made sense, and bought it. So I didn't have to do any work to that one except buy a washer.
Oh, nice.
And then
And is it common for the units to come with washer and dryer there?
I've seen it both ways. So my first house and my last house, the one I'm sitting in right now, both came with washers and dryers. The middle one didn't. Um, People don't like to move those things. They're heavy. Water comes out the back when you pull it out. So you won't usually get a new one, although on some flips, nicer flips, you will. But a lot of times people leave them there, and a lot of the older ones from like the 80s still work really well. My washer that I got with this house just died. It was from 1984.
Hmm.
So I did just get a new one, but the dryer is probably from the 90s, early 2000s. It still works great. It's pretty common around here. People do haul them away sometimes. A lot of times it was the landlords or whatever, or people would say we're going to upgrade for the next house. We don't want to haul this, so we'll just leave this here. I usually put a thing in the contract of as is, and not only as is, but all appliances stay, right? Although one time with this house, I actually stipulated it. Everything stays except you have to get this treadmill out of here. It was in the contract because I don't want to move this thing out of here. And it's heavy as hell and bulky, and I don't want to get it out down the steps out the door.
Nice, nice. And
But
so, and so is the plan to continue to kind of house hack and rent out the rooms?
you know, um, I'm kind of asking myself that lately. When I was looking and eventually bought this house, I was starting to look for, say, a duplex, and I could rent out the other half, right? But at the time, the right stuff wasn't on the market at the right price. Maybe some of it is now, but now I'm here. Um, I would say that I have gotten used to this, and I don't mind it. I'm not married, so if I were, married and or at least in a very serious relationship, and there's another income coming into the house, then the next one I might not house hack at all, right? Um, but our housing is priced, at least most of it, maybe not studios and one bedrooms, but our housing is mostly priced for two income households. Well, What if you don't have a two-income household? You can buy a house, but you can't, it's more difficult to make the payment, or you don't want to make as much of the payment or whatever it is. Well, house hacking is a partial solution to that. Now, there are multiple incomes in the house. One of them is paying you rent. And, frankly, there's a lease. So it's kind of more stable than, the girlfriend paying part of the rent, because what if she leaves, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a really good way around it. And in fact, it's growing. A lot of people are finding out about it and doing it without even thinking about it. I was just visiting yesterday a couple of friends of mine who just bought their first house. They also work for FedEx in the blue collar operations end, and they bought their first house in a suburb in Mississippi called Olive Branch. It was just like a '90s throw up job kind of deal. But they'd had a roommate from their previous rental on the other side of town, and he wasn't gonna have a place to live, and he needed a place to live. So they said, "Hey, why don't we this 3 bedroom house, but we only need one. Why don't we rent you the other room?" They didn't. I talked to them yesterday. I said, "You're house hacking." They said, "What's house hacking?" I said, "You're doing it right now." This is becoming more and more common.
Yeah, and like you said, I think now is a great time while you're young, you're not married, you don't have kids, right? So there's not really that other person that you got to make feel comfortable. Now I have a question. Do you think it's harder to find a roommate or a tenant, like to fill out like a house?
I'm kind of confused. So do you mean a roommate, as in you're renting the place and you're subletting to somebody else, or a tenant?
Yep.
So I think it's I think it's easier. Well, it depends on how big your social circle is.
Hmm.
I think it's easier for most people to find a roommate.
Hmm.
As far as a tenant who wants to share the house with you, that I think is generally more difficult.
Hmm.
Um, I've found some ways over the years to find people that you normally wouldn't find, but part of it is, if you're a big leasing company, okay, or you're a big property manager and you're finding tenants for owners or for your own properties, and it's a lot. If you're the head of that company, you have to say, okay, I've got four leasing specialists, and they're interviewing tenants, and they're running all their information, getting their stipulations on their paychecks, all these things. You have to do one of two things. You have to really, 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 really trust that those leasing specialists really know what they're doing and have your best interest at heart. And even if they do, have enough rigor to care, all this kind of thing, or you set really, really, really tight parameters. Okay. And then if you don't get enough, maybe you loosen them a little bit for someone that you like or something like that. When you yourself are doing this, is one of the advantages actually to self-managing and to being a house hacker and all this stuff. You can look at somebody and go, "Oh yeah, your credit score is great, but I happen to know that you just bought that new car." Okay. And I don't know exactly what your payment is, but I bet it's pretty high, right? That might be a problem when it comes time to, pay rent. Hey, you might be trying to, screw me over, or more likely you're lying to yourself. Um, but it works the other end too. Oh, your credit's terrible, but you had a bankruptcy 5 years ago. That's why your credit's terrible. Well, what debt do you have? Do you have any student loans? Do you have a car note? Oh, I see your car's paid off. You don't have any student loans. You make decent money. You screwed your life up 7 years ago, or 5 years ago. You're still 2 years until you get out of it, but you've been fine for the last 3 years.
Hmm.
Well, that's actually a much better tenant than the first guy. But
Yeah,
but are you the guy who owns the big management company? Are you going to trust Jenny, the leasing specialist, to really look that hard and care that much? Even if you like her, even if she's great, is she going to do that? It's not her property, right?
very true.
But if it's you, you're the one taking the risk. Um, and you can also move a lot faster. Let's
Hmm.
say somebody's got a bad situation. My current tenant here, she found out she was living with her father. She had lived out of town for a lot of years. She'd come back. She was living with her father. Turns out her father was stealing from her. Now she
Hmm.
made good money. She made good money. She's a welding instructor, so she makes more money than I do. But she needed to go somewhere fast. She needed to get out of there. Betrayed by family, all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? She'd only gotten this job a month beforehand. All these other leasing companies were going to make her wait weeks, and her history wasn't long enough. That was almost a year ago, and she's been one of the best tenants I've had.
Hmm.
You know, I would say, and by the way, I found her on Reddit. she found me. She found an old post that I had put up saying I was going to have a room available pretty soon from months ago, from months beforehand. And she followed up. And I've had several other people ask me since, and I'm like, sorry, I'm full up. You know, one's rented and the other has the room rented. But it's amazing what you can do when you're not under the strictures of, you know, someone's looking over your shoulder and checking all your work and making you use all these metrics. And you know, if you can sit down and evaluate the person, don't get me wrong, every once in a while somebody's gonna, somebody's a good liar. But you still run background checks, you still run credit check, just to see what their monthly debt is. I mean, to
Hmm.
me, I've been kicking this around the last month or two. Maybe this is a bigger can of worms, but I don't understand why more landlords don't use DTI like you would for a mortgage instead of credit score. Like pull the report
Hmm.
because you still need to know what they owe, right?
Hmm.
But I feel like there's at least a niche for some landlord out there to be like, yeah, 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 we don't care what the actual score is. We care about your ability to pay. So we're still going to verify your stipulations and whatever, but that's backward looking. We need to know what you owe now.
Yeah, I think DETI is their ability to pay. I think their credit score is their willingness to pay. Because if they ain't paying Visa, they probably ain't gonna pay me.
Right. And you'd see that
Yeah.
on the report. Like the question
Oh
is like,
yeah.
why is the score bad? But I
Yeah.
mean, we also have a lot of people around here who have very thin credit,
Mm-hmm.
who we've got people walking around who, I mean, not literally cash, but have paid cash for everything in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one explained credit to them when they were younger, or they had a bad, or they crashed their credit when they were younger, and instead of trying to fix it, they just said, "Okay, I'm just going to do cash for everything. I'm just gonna do straight out of my account for everything. Never take any loans out, and then you can't build credit." But no one told them that,
Yeah, yeah, but no one told them that. That's
and,
true.
and we
You
have
had
a lot of
mentioned
that here.
you found your roommate on Reddit. I've heard a
Yeah.
lot of things. I've heard Craigslist, heard Zillow, all Facebook. I think Reddit is the first time that I've heard that one.
Oh, and I've got people that approach me all the time, find old posts, and are like, "Hey, is this available? Hey, is this available?" Keep in mind that, and you've got some of this everywhere, but a lot of people would rather deal with a quote unquote, people around here call them private landlords. Okay.
Hmm.
People that don't advertise, self managers, all that. And yeah, some of those people are trying to screw somebody over, but a lot of them aren't. We've got a lot of bad actors around here. There's some everywhere, and we've got some great companies around here that do a great job. But one of the downsides of people always say, "Oh, we have an affordable housing problem here." We do not have an affordable housing problem. We have tons of affordable housing. What we don't have is good quality, very much good quality affordable
Hmm.
housing. Because if you are, if you're a landlord and you're, especially if, but not only if you're from out of town. I know a couple of local scumbags. Or I don't know them, thank God, but I know of them. Um, you are, you're trying to pull the maximum cash flow out of there, and you bought in the wrong area of town, or you bought the wrong thing in the wrong area of town. So, like for instance, if you get there's certain parts of town where if you buy a house, you're probably going to get a much better tenant than if you buy an apartment building. And so you can have an area of town where the houses are filled and mostly in good condition, and some are kept up, some aren't kept up, but some even by owners, okay, by owner occupied. And then down the street, there's an apartment building from the '60s that's absolutely falling apart and has 50% occupancy. And this is market, not Section 8 or something.
Hmm.
And it's riddled with gangs and all falling apart. And some idiot from California bought it and thinks oh, I got this apartment building for so cheap. Yeah, well, in that part of town, people want to live in the houses, not the apartments. Now, I live in a part of town where people are willing to live in the apartment if they can't get a house because it's a nicer part of town and they're willing to have that, less space to afford to live in this part of town.
Hmm.
But it's there's a lot of nuance there, and you have a lot of landlords, even some that own some of the houses, who are walking around not doing their maintenance. um, maybe the management company calls them and says, "Hey, look, there's this roof leak," and they go, "Okay, I'll pay to fix it." And they do that. And it happens two more times in the end. They're like, "You need a new roof," and the owner's just like, "Sorry, I don't want to pay for a new roof." Even if they eventually get to it, now you got black mold eventually. I mean, this is one of the. I know y'all. technically a rainforest up there. Well, it is down here too. It's just it doesn't rain as many days out of the year, but when we get it, I mean, we get torrents, we get flash floods all the time,
Hmm.
and so a lot of water comes in.
Oh
This is
yeah,
not the Southwest.
and then that heat, I'm sure, and that humidity just adds to it.
It's a breeding ground for it. And to be fair to some of these people, they don't know it might be in the walls and it hasn't shown itself yet. That tenant that I mentioned, that prospective tenant that I was looking at that house for on Tuesday, she two of her last three rentals, and she has good income and low debt but bad credit. She's one of those people. Her last two out of her last three rentals have had leaks and mold problems. She's lost pieces of furniture.
Oh,
It's hazardous to her health. Okay, and it's all down to what do landlords want to do. Don't get me wrong, we have some great landlords here in Memphis, and
mhm.
both management companies and owners. We've got some great ones, but a lot of them um, tend to work in the nicer areas of town where it's easier for the rents to support the maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Not
So
all of
is
them.
it? So is that something that you're gonna think about? Is trying to figure out who the bad characters are and maybe try to swoop their properties up and
I don't.
fix it
I,
up?
I, I
Or
don't. I don't. It's not a bad idea, except from a price standpoint. But I don't want their properties. If
fair enough.
they've, if they've, I'll give you an example, and I'll even name a name. I'll name a name here because no one here in Memphis will disagree with me. Okay, so before I moved into my first house, I was renting an apartment. It's the only apartment I ever rented in Memphis, and it was through a company. I don't know who the owner was. I forget, but it was through a company called Crestcore. And Crestcore was started by two guys, and I know a former employee who's now a contractor friend of mine. So we got a little bit of inside information. Crestcore was started by two guys, and I won't name them, but one of them apparently just super nice guy, wanted to do it the right way, did all this stuff, brought some money to this. The other guy already had a fair number of properties, and they sort of combined it where I bring some properties and you bring maybe a couple properties and some money, and we're going to expand this thing. Well, the first guy wants to do all this the right way, wants to, we're going to make money by providing good places to live. Sure, we're not going to pay for all the extra bells and whistles and the unnecessaries, but we're going to have well maintained, and we're not going to take owners as clients either that aren't willing to do that, right? The other guy didn't care. And
Yeah.
eventually they started, but he didn't, the first guy didn't know that. So eventually they start fighting about this. And I don't know all the details, but eventually the first guy just left the business, just just left the business, and the other guy just carried on how he did. The apartment complex that I was in was right on a line between a nice neighborhood and a not so nice neighborhood. And sometimes there's transition areas, but in Memphis it can be very stark. It can be a block or two. And this is also right next to a train line. There was an old 60s apartment complex, probably, I don't know, 22 units or something like that, four buildings. And um, I was on the second floor. These were two-story buildings, except for the smallest one. And I was on the second floor. And when I first got there, it was okay. It was, you know, old. It was, hadn't done a ton of stuff to it, but, it was livable. Over the course of the time there, I mean, it just got worse and worse. When I moved in, they said, "Hey, do you want new security doors? Do you want security doors at all? Because it's back door and front door." And I said, "Yes, I would love them." A year later, I came out of the shower like calling the police because somebody was banging at both of my doors. Okay, I couldn't figure out what they wanted to steal, but they were banging it. It was the maintenance crew putting in the doors that I had said yes to a year ago
Oh
with
gosh.
no notice, with no anything. Oh, it gets worse. Somebody comes to somebody knocks on the back door. By this time, because of that first incident, I bought my first firearm. Okay, so somebody comes knocking at the back door, and turns out I'd left it unlocked or something. They like start opening the door, and they're like, "Hey, we're here to view the apartment," and I'm like, "I'm not out, man. Like, I live here." They're like, "It's apartment six." I'm like, "It's the other building. Some of the numbers have fallen off. You want the other building?" And they just wouldn't believe it. I had to flash a gun at them to get them to leave.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
and then it turns out that that unit, I know this is a long story, but it's great. Turns out that that unit that they were going to view, someone else came to view it and actually got, got the right building number and looked at it. Unbeknownst to the management company, those both of those units, the one above, one below, were unoccupied. The floor between them had collapsed.
What? Like,
Yeah,
wait, wait.
yeah, it had fallen in. Someone went to view it, and it's like, floor's gone, dude. Um, and then for the coup de grace, and this one I was already in the process of buying my house when this happened. A friend used to live in the unit next to me, but after a while he moved out and left town because he finished college, and they moved a guy in and his family next door, and he was going to be the new building super. They're going to have a super, right? So, this is only a couple months before I leave in 2019, but one day he knocks on our door and he goes, "Hey, man, have you?" And he had a look. Apparently, he had a look on his face. This is my roommate telling me this. Apparently, he had a look on his face of like, I've just seen death or something. And he goes, "Hey, man, have you been downstairs in one of the downstairs units right below you?" And I'm like, "No, why would I go down there? I don't live in there." He's like, "I don't know how long it's been going on. This unit was also unoccupied. I don't know how long it's been going on, but all of your sewage from upstairs has been flooding into the downstairs unit for like months now."
Oh,
So this is an extreme case, but let's just say that anything that company touches, if I find out it was two owners ago, I don't care. Anything that company touches has touched, I refuse to buy. Absolutely refuse. I don't care how good the price is.
holy
Because
smoke.
I have you never know what maintenance someone's done inside the walls and things like that. You take it. But if I know for a fact that they haven't done it. I know that they haven't done it. And so if I ever see Crestcore on it at all, nope, gone. Will not purchase, will not buy, will not look. I don't care if they give it to me for free.
Oh man, it fell in. They got the sewage. That is shitty. They have like management right there. Holy smokes.
Yeah. And again, that's a more extreme case, but a more extreme case for the kind of area it was in, because it was like the last block. If you went a block north, I mean, house prices would be 300,000 easy.
Hmm.
But because it was right next to the train, it was still cheaper and all of that. And in fact, it got bought and renovated. Someone did buy it and renovate it because it ended up at the edge of, I mean, literally the last building in a historic district where you couldn't build new multifamily, and so it was grandfathered in. I predicted this. I said they're doing this for the neighborhood. Someone's going to buy this and fix it up because it's been grandfathered, and they did,
Mm.
and it was, and it's because of the train. Even though the rents were a lot higher and it was a lot nicer now, they haven't been getting the rents they needed, and now it's on the market because their debt's about to reset, and they're screwed. Not
Mm.
Crestcore, the other guy. They sold it to
Mm.
this local real estate family who actually did a good job fixing it. But some things you just want to avoid, man.
Yeah, so it sounds like you want to avoid crest core. Sounds like you want to avoid the train.
So yes and no. You want to avoid the train if you want to if you want to have like a really nice apartment. So, or how do I put this? Memphis, a lot of people don't realize that Memphis is tied with a bunch of cities for having like the first or second most class one railroads go through it in the country. We have
Mm.
five, which is a lot for a city, of 630,000 people in a metro area of, 1.2 million. That's a lot. And this is a very logistics focused town. FedEx is here. There's lots of Amazon warehouses here, more than you would normally get. Um, TJ Maxx warehouse, Nike's got a couple facilities here. There's for distribution. There's a ton of that, and so you get a lot of truck traffic. You get a lot of air traffic. Second busiest cargo airport in the world, where I used to work until I moved down the street and to a different job still with FedEx and all those railroads. And so, interestingly enough, Memphians are actually a lot more used to train noise than most people are. We're used to it being a problem. We know where the tunnels are or the crossings. This was crossings at grades, so you're gonna have to go around. You're just gonna have to wait. Um, and train noise and that kind of thing. So don't get me wrong, the train noise makes properties along it less valuable, but you're also in that case, you're also right next to a really nice neighborhood. So there were people that were willing to pay, $1,200 for an apartment in that neighborhood that didn't even have central HVAC, that needed window units even fixed up. Okay, that was that was by that time, because they put a lot of money into it, in good repair. Now there weren't a lot of people willing to do that, so some of the units ended up being like 950. When I lived there, they were 550 for a two-bedroom,
Mm.
which is pretty insane. But there are people who can deal with it more than you normally get, but you can't. But it limits what you can do literally right next to, I mean, literally across the street. It limits what you can do in terms of the upper limit, because at some point the rent's going to get high enough where no matter how nice the building is, and it wasn't that nice, somebody's going to say, I'd rather rent this other apartment for the same price or slightly more, a little bit further away, that isn't right next to the train. But they
All
deal with
right.
it more than you think. It cuts right through the university area, and there are people that will pay a lot to live right next to it because it's in the university area.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I know over by me, we have the port, we have the base, and so depending on which railroad track you're on, it's really not that big of a deal because maybe it comes once per week or two times a day, so they're not that bad. Some parts it's like every hour, boom, trains go by. So it's good to kind of know what your local area is.
Yeah, it's not usually every hour for us, but a lot. I mean, there are lots of frequencies. You got BNSF, you got Norfolk Southern, you got Nashville. I mean, I'm currently a block and a half up from a different train line. And remember, this neighborhood I live in is very close to the one I was just describing. There are these two that come pretty close to each other, and I get train noise or whatever, but I get to live in a nice part of town that I can actually afford. So
Mhm.
if the area is nice, people will put up with it. They will.
Okay. And so up where I'm at, right, prices are gone up. We have rent control now. Tenant issues are a nightmare. If someone wanted to invest out of state, why is Memphis a good area to invest in?
Well, there's a couple reasons. One I already mentioned. I'll go to some others in a second, but the first one I'm just going to iterate this. Um, y'all have probably heard of rent to value ratio, right? And the 1% line. It's very difficult unless you put in a lot of cash to get rents to the 1% line these days. Of course, that's just a rule of thumb, right? But this is one of the last cities where you can really, really do that. Milwaukee's another good one for that. I've been told St. Louis, but I haven't checked in on St. Louis in a while. And I wouldn't be surprised about Cleveland either, but I heard there's more regulation coming in, at least from the city of Cleveland now. So maybe you'd want more some of the Cleveland suburbs and West Side, because the East Side taxes are crazy. Um, but yeah, I mean, you can get properties relatively cheap. You can the labor's a little cheaper around here, so the fix up cost is a little bit cheaper. It's not crazy much cheaper, but it's cheaper. And you can rent it out and actually get the rents. I mean, one of the effects of us having a lot of people who have bad credit or no credit or whatever is some of those people actually make decent money, at least for the area. So you get a lot of people that or they have decent credit, but they've never been able, they had kids earlier and they can't accumulate the money needed for a down payment. Well, they've still got to live somewhere, and some of these people make $30 an hour.
Oh,
Okay, which
wow.
is a lot around here. Um, the effective, not quite minimum, but the effective minimum wage around here is probably 17, $18 an hour. I mean, not there's a few things that are less than that, but that's normal. A regular able-bodied person with no education can go get a job. Heck, can go get a job where I used to work that starts at 20.67 an hour,
Mm.
and that's at the main FedEx hub. But there are lots of people making 25, 27, $30 an hour. I think the Walmart warehouse down on Lamar starts at 25. You know, you might have to do two of those jobs or something like that, because it may not be the hours you want, but sometimes you can get those with all the hours you want. The money is there for people to pay a lot of people. It's not concentrated in a few people. There's money is there for a lot of people to make enough to pay the rent that pays your mortgage and gives you, he pays your taxes and pays your insurance and gives you a little bit of a profit at the end of the month, right? Even starting out. Um, but a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think Memphis poor, nobody can pay for anything. Well, there's a lot of people who actually can, and they need a place to live.
Mm.
So that's one. That's one factor. Another factor is, um, if you are, again, back to prices, if you are just starting out and you've just got some money, or let's say you want to start out, you're a Silicon Valley guy, or you're a Silicon Hills guy, or whatever, okay, and you've got a couple 100,000 to mess around with, and you're thinking, well, okay, I'm going to go and buy something, $1 million house, and I'm going to put X down, and you can start out here with cash if you wanted to. It's going to cash flow from day one, and then you can just say, okay, I bought a $200,000 duplex in a decent area of town, and I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna take out 120 from that, and I'm gonna go buy a 3 bedroom, one or two bed house in a, not great but not the worst parts of town. Okay, and that'll rent pretty well, and then you can take a little bit more out if you want to out of that. And that's your down payment on another one that you're gonna have a loan on. I mean,
Hmm.
just having lower prices really helps, because it doesn't matter if if you're starting out and you say, well, look, this area is it's higher price, but it's going to appreciate a lot more and all that. If you can't ever start, then there's no point.
Hmm.
There's no point at all, because you can't ever start. You can't ever get on the ladder. So but a lot of places where you can are like rural areas that don't have a lot of jobs and things like that. There are jobs here now. The flip side to that, oh, and I'll say the landlord tenant laws. We have pretty favorable landlord tenant laws. Don't get me wrong, you still don't want to get a squatter or something, but the sheriff's department will help you out, if you really need to deal with that. We don't have the kinds of laws y'all have out there. We still have tenant protections,
Of course.
and in fact, we have a specific law that if you take a security deposit, you have to keep that security deposit in a you can put other deposits in there, but they all have to, it can be one account that has all your security deposits in there, but it all has to be separate from your main accounts. It can't even be your normal like rent account.
Hmm.
Okay. It's got to be a separate account that you only keep for security deposits. So that's one
Hmm.
little weird quirk. But besides that, it's pretty favorable around here. And I won't get into all the other details and some of the stuff I've never done before, but you know, you have that. I think one of the big downfalls is local knowledge. So one of the reasons that I can do what I do, and I wish I could do it faster, but we all do. One of the reasons that I can do what I do, one of the reasons I haven't collapsed already, is that I know the local market. I can look at an area of town, a large area of town, and people say, that's a bad area. And I go, well, parts of it are, but parts of it are actually better than you think they are. But I know this over here, and I know this over here, and I know that up in this part of town, this little pocket neighborhood over here is actually really safe, and they've got their own little elementary school. And I'm thinking of one or two specific areas right now. And overall, that area is pretty bad. But this is a middle class neighborhood where the homes are just cheaper because it's in this part of town, and they will be a little bit more than the ones in the bad part of that area. Because once you get outside of the loop in Memphis, the central interstate loop, everything gets really splotchy in terms of good and bad, and you just kind of got to know what those things are. And somebody coming in, will either say, "Oh, I only want to buy in the nice parts of Memphis," and then they won't get as much of a discount, but they might if they try really hard, right? But they're probably new, so they're probably not going to sit there and send out a bunch of disrespectful offers, right? But
Hmm.
they'll go say, "Oh, I'll go. I've heard that there's some good parts of this area. I'm going to go buy a house there," and then they buy it in the worst neighborhood possible, because they're using a comp circle that's 5 miles wide when they should be using one that's a quarter mile. I mean, a half mile wide,
Hmm.
right? And there's a lot of it. Trust me, I've seen it. I've I've never seen it directly with anybody that I know, but I've seen, why did that house go for that there? And I look, oh, California.
Hmm.
That's why. And don't get me wrong, some people are smart about it. Some people have sort of a local person, either their agent or someone that they know, that can really teach them the ground rules.
Hmm.
But I'll give you an example of an out of town seller that was having this problem. That one that I went and looked at on Tuesday, it was bank owned, and it was owned by a bank out of Delray Beach, I believe, South Florida. And you look on the regular listings, it didn't even say bank owned, which was smart. But if you go look at the MLS, I had Jeff pull the MLS listing. and there's some extra stuff on there, extra requirements. So they said, okay, we're going to do an offer review period in 3 days. Keep in mind, it's 5 days when I'm seeing the listing. We're going to do an offer review period in 3 days. Earnest money, earnest money is 10%. And oh, by the way, the utilities are off. If you want to turn them on, that's fine, but we're not going to deal with that. Okay. This means that they don't know how Memphis works. I can just tell just by I wouldn't even have to look at the ownership. Because if you were local to here, you would know that offer review periods only existed here for relatively nice stuff during the pandemic, and that's it. I know that some places in the country they've kind of fallen off. Some places they're still a thing in more tight markets, like say Connecticut, right? But we don't do that here. But that's not a big deal because people are still going to come at you with offers. Okay, the earnest money. Well, in Memphis, the standard earnest money is either 1% of value, contract value. So it's a $500,000 house in a nice neighborhood, that'd be $5,000, right? Or if you're dealing with lower end stuff, sometimes it's just $1,000 flat, and that's the
Mm.
earnest money. So they want somebody to put down 10% earnest money when the local standard is 1%. Okay. And then the last thing about the utilities, and I understand this, they don't want to turn them on. It's been sitting for a little while since I think it foreclosed in September. Okay, that's fine, except that shows me that they don't understand how the local utility works. The local utility is the nation's largest three service utility, MLGW, Memphis Light Gas and Water. It is city owned. It is very bureaucratic. If you want to get power and water would still be in the pipes, but if you want to get power and gas and officially water turned on, you have to set up a scheduled time with them. Someone has to sit on the house for a day or sometimes 2 days and not leave. I have heard stories of people,
Mm.
they go out to the gas station to grab some snacks and come back. The MLGW truck's outside, and they're like, hey, and the truck just drives away. Okay. And you have to pay a $200 connection fee, by the way. Oh, and by the way, you have to present proof that you live there. So you have to present, and maybe that's true in a lot of parts of the country. You have to present either like, a deed or a lease or something like that. Like basically means I don't know how it is in a lot of the rest of the country, but oh, you can say that I can turn the utilities on, but I can't. I can't until
Mm.
I own the thing. Sorry, guys, can't do it. At least as far as I know. So they're not going to get a lot of bids on that thing. They're going to get a
Mm.
couple, but they're going to be low ball as hell, even for how cheap it is,
Mm.
because they don't understand the local market. But if you're buying from, say, you're in Denver and you're looking at that thing and you see those requirements, you go, that seems reasonable. When what it really says is you should lowball the heck out of them, at least at the beginning. But you're not going to know that because you don't, even if you've researched local prices, you probably don't know, those local standards. So there's not, it could be a great opportunity for you, but you're going to pay too much.
Mm. Okay, okay. So it sounds like you are the Memphis and expert. How does someone get a hold of you if they're interested in investing in the area and kind of want your expertise?
Well, this is going to be an interesting one. Um, I don't, I don't really do much social media, like on purpose. Um, I don't know if I want to get my phone number out. I'll tell you what, email.
Okay.
My email is jsdarr1, that's the number one, at gmail.com. If anybody wants to talk to me about that, they can do that, and I can help guide you through the local process. It's knowing the map, it's having people you trust. There's a lot of out of town investment here, and some of it's smart, but a lot of it's dumb. A lot of it's dumb money chasing that that pretty good rent to value ratio, and a lot of them leave with their pockets turned out. Even if nobody scammed them, they leave with a lot of them leave with a few do it smart, but if a lot leave with their pockets turned out and cursing the place and never wanted to come back.
Oh, jeez. Well, folks, if you don't want to end up like that, make sure you reach out to Jackson. And Jackson, I appreciate you being on today, man.
Had a great time, Curtis.